Emily, welcome to Realistic Happiness Podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, you've left a career in finance, right, to
Yeah.
pursue performance and well-being. I'm just curious, what sparked the curiosity for neuroscience and productivity?
Yeah, it's definitely not the usual career change. So for me, when I think about it, it really started quite early on, this curiosity for performance. So I'd always been really ambitious. And when I think back to when I was a teenager, specifically when I was at sixth form, there's a really poignant moment that's like a bit of a core memory for me. So I was in my sociology class, which was my favorite subject at the time, and we were learning around how different factors impact people and societies. And this specific one was around family dynamics. So it was around what happens if you have two parents, one parent, siblings, those kind of things. And my teacher called me out and said, Emily, as someone who comes from a single parent family, statistically, when we look at the data, you have that negatively impacts your chances of success. And I was taken back by that. We had an amazing relationship and he didn't mean it maliciously, but it was more the fact that made me think, but why? Why should it matter if I have two parents, one parent? Why should that impact what I can go on to do in later life? So that, I think, really stirred it up in me to really want to go on and achieve big things. But then at the same time, coming from that single parent family and watching, like the data was saying that it can come with some challenges emotionally, financially, and seeing that for me at home, it really gave me this relentless drive to want to do and be better, to create that for me and my mum. So that is really where it all stemmed from. So performance and this love for self-improvement has been something that's always been part of my story. But what has changed is my definition of high performance.
Oh, tell us. What does it mean then?
And it's changed drastically. So when I think about that's what drove me into finance in the first place, really. So this desire for high performance, for ambition, for challenge. And it really does give you that it's a very steep learning curve. You work on incredible projects, some of the most intelligent people that I have ever met. But at the time, how I was thinking of high performance, it was really around working harder, working longer hours, more intensely, really grinding. And I really honestly wore my long hours as a badge of honor. And I think that in parts it definitely wasn't healthy. And I really saw that in not only myself, but in others and across the industry. So in doing so, that I realized that I was slowly in this pursuit of excellence and high performance, having this definition of just having to work harder, I was really running myself into the ground. I was working all hours of the day. I was glued to my laptop from morning until late at night and just rolling straight into bed. I would often eat 2 or 3 of my meals at my desk. And often my husband sometimes would have to come and bring my food to my desk because I'd forgotten to eat lunch. Those kind of things, and opting for the convenience food, skipping exercise classes or social plans because I didn't have time, or at least I thought so. And I was taking my laptop on every holiday just in case of an emergency. So my laptop's come everywhere with me, from when I climbed Kilimanjaro to around Europe. But there was a particular trip where I was in Spain with 10 of my friends, and we were on a boat trip, and they're all there having amazing time, lots of fun. And I was there on my laptop, shielding from the waves that were coming over the side because I had a deadline. And it's funny now for me looking back on that now, but it was really a bit of a wake-up call on the definition that I had for high performance at the time. And it really then asked me to ask myself these big questions. Is this it? Is this really how I want to live my life? Do I want to work this hard for the moments that I do get to enjoy with my loved ones? I'm spending it doing more work. And for me at that moment, the answer was no. So that was really the moment that it changed for me, and I left finance and went into this deep reflection of around who am I, what do I want to do with my life, what kind of impact do I want to have. Also really thinking, coming back to this question of what does it mean to be high performing when you are really ambitious? How do you do it in a way that is actually helpful? And so now it's meant that I went on this journey and really dug deep into the research of what we can learn from it. So I'd already trained as a coach did my first certification back in 2020 through a desire for loving to help other people and really wanting to be able to do that in a more structured way. So I was already in that world, but then more and more I wanted to learn, okay, how can I help people even better? What can we learn from the research, the evidence? And this is where I really came across the neuroscience
Mm.
element of peak performance and what we can learn from that. And ultimately, I came across Stephen Kotler's work. So he is one of the world's leading experts on human performance and specifically flow states. He's 11 times best-selling author. He's an award-winning journalist. But really, he's dedicated the last 30 or so years to decoding the neurobiology of flow, as he would call it, which effectively means what is happening in our brain and our body when we're in flow state, this peak performance state. And this was what really then fueled my desire to go into the space even more, because the more I delved into his work and into the neuroscience, one, I was fascinated, but two, I was mind blown that this wasn't more widely known about, that this wasn't taught in work, that it wasn't taught in schools, because the things that flow state and the neuroscience of peak performance that we can learn from it, it's really helping us to flourish personally, professionally, but specifically some of the aspects of performance that it is significantly amplifying are some of those that are the most helpful when you're working in industries like finance or consulting or sales or those kind of roles where they are very demanding. It is competitive.
Mm.
It definitely is quite high stress. So really, that is what really cemented that I really wanted to go into that direction. So I trained with Stephen Kotler, became a performance neuroscience coach, certified, but then also went on to have my team of 4 neuroscientists, because it's become such a foundational thing that I wanted not just to have the fluffier approaches in coaching, but I really wanted to have the evidence and the neuroscience with that. So the team of 4, so that's their area of expertise. They have the PhDs. They can help me really translate the latest science into digestible strategies and hacks. So that's how I go from finance to what I'm doing now.
Wow. And with finance, it must have been really tough for you to shift your mindset, right? Because the long hours,
Mm.
like the finance bros kind of TikTok trends and stuff, it's really glamorized to
Mm-hmm.
work a lot. And like you said, you were chained to your desk. You were your husband was bringing you meals. Like I've been there, done that, when I've not only had deadlines, but your boss is also that expectation, right? Like they're doing it too. Your team members are doing it. So if you feel like, oh, I just want to, have like a proper lunch break or like actually
Mm.
clock out at 4 or 5 p.m., if you're the one doing it, everyone else is in that kind of pressure loop.
Mm.
It's really hard. It's really hard. It must have been really tough for you to like transition and
Mm.
come to that realization, like life is not all about work.
Yeah. It is really difficult to come to that realization, especially when you're so in it. Because when you're in it, and as I was, and so many of the people that I work with are, that you're so focused on what you need to do in front of you, because there is a mountain of work. There are people chasing you for things. You have client deadlines. So it's hard to sometimes have the time, the energy, and the mental bandwidth to really think about, okay, how could I be doing this even better? Am I working in the most efficient way? Am I sleeping enough? Am I eating well enough? All of these things that are actually going to help my brain to perform better. But when you're in it, it can be really difficult to see that for what it is and make those changes. For sure.
Yeah. And I want people to take away from this episode as well. Emily, I'm sure you want to as well, that the flow that you're gonna describe and the stages, we don't want you to like misuse it
Mm,
to chain yourself even more to your desk.
yes.
We want you to use it as like a tool to focus on things in your personal life as well, right? Because you can use
Hmm.
flow not just for work and high performance, but also to improve your personal life.
Yeah, and with the flow states and the other things we're talking about, so this new definition that I have, it's really about sustainable peak performance. So it's not just working at a high level for one day, one project, one week, one month. It's how can I do that consistently month after month, year after year. And flow is a great tool for that because yes, it elevates performance, but it also benefits well-being at the same time, which is why I think it is such a powerful tool that I'm really passionate about sharing more broadly.
Yeah, and I only learned about flow through you, which is really exciting, and we'll dive into in a second. So with the myth of being busy all the time, what's like, can you help us kind of identify why that happens, perhaps?
Mm.
Why there's this kind of busyness pandemic happening in the world?
Yeah, so I think it's what has been driving it. So I guess in a post-COVID world, that the lines between work and home have got even more blurred. And already in industries, even before COVID, when I was in finance before that, it still was very much that if there is stuff to do, you need to get it done. It doesn't matter what time that you are finishing. So that there's a bit of a cultural thing, depending on what industry you're in, what team you're in, what role. But also then the people feeling like you have to do more to perform because even if you are at home and you have your laptop now, whereas previously you could maybe close your laptop in the office, you go home and you can forget about it. But now really thinking about how to work more sustainably, and it is a difficult shift, but thinking around how you can do it for yourself and why that would be important. So thinking if you were able to be more efficient and do perform at the highest level, but without the sacrifice to your health, your well-being, and the things that are most important to you, what will that give you more of? And likely it is more time back, more energy back to be present at home, to not wake up with that crippling stress in your stomach that I used to have at times, where work can be the first thing that you think of and the last thing that you think about at night. So that's why I really want to equip people with these tools. But it is also a mindset shift that needs to happen at the individual level, but at the team level, company level, industry levels. But I think there's now a growing focus on well-being, which I think is amazing. So, but in these businesses, there still is the big focus on performance. So it's how can you perform at the highest level without the detriment to well-being, so that they can both be nurtured as one.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? Because it doesn't look like employers, particularly in the US, for example, and some Asian countries, that they're looking to be flexible with understanding what employees want. And we need to kind of adapt ourselves, our mindset in a way that's not gonna, compromise. And we think about work before bed, and it's the first thing we check in the morning, emails, because that's not healthy. Just not having a clear boundary. And I totally agree with you. I remember that I need to find the quote, but another like scientist kind of explained this, that the reason we think about work so much is because we bring it home with us and we use our minds now. If you're in projects, like, you're required to be creative, and that's the kind of tool that you provide the company, right? Whilst before it was, if you think 100 years back, you would go in somewhere and you would mine, you would, use a hammer, like it would be like, or knit. So like it would be physical, and you leave it there and you go home. So you can really distance yourself. And now tools are essentially in your brain and in your laptop, something that you have, or your phone, which you have constantly. That's not my phone. I'm so used to having my phone, or your iPad or your phone, right? Which is something you constantly have. So if your boss asks you like, oh, you can do this quickly, right? Like you don't want to feel like a letdown, and like you're not performing or you're not taking your job seriously. So yeah, there is completely a blurred line there, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that it is really sad. And like you say, that now a lot of us are paid for how well we can use our brains.
Yes.
Because in the likes of finance, but in so many other jobs, that it is, okay, how well can you solve problems? How well can you make decisions? How well can you interact with the people around you, whether that's your team, whether that's closing deals, whatever it is, that it is very much about how our brain can perform. And that's why it really does need to be around nurturing the well-being alongside the performance, because otherwise it's a detriment to the performance as well as the well-being.
Yeah, we're not robots. We can't be expected to be creative all the time and problem solving all the time. That's just absurd.
No, and as I'm sure we'll get to as well, around some of the reasons as to why that is so important to have that time to switch off, to reset, because without that, it's really hard for you to reach and sustain those high levels that a lot of people are striving to be at.
So let's get into it.
Mm.
Flow states. Emily, flow states. We're
Mm.
all curious. We're dying to know. So can you explain to us what the states are and how they can help us with productivity?
Mm. So I guess first of all, to put it into context, if I asked you, so if you can think about a time recently maybe where you have been so immersed in what you're doing, you're so focused on the task at hand that time just flies by, that you might have been doing it for 2 hours, but it's felt like 20 minutes and everything else has just kind of faded into the background. What is it for you? What was maybe the task that gave that for you?
Definitely creative or like
Mm-hmm.
writing gets me into that. It feels weird, doesn't it? It's almost
Mm.
like what in ADHD world is called hyper focus, but I think a lot of people get this too. I just feel like everything, I'm just channeling my energy there right in front of me. Everything's just blurred,
Yeah.
doesn't exist. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really enjoying it. Like I'm really
Yeah.
in the mood. I'm really focused.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, absolutely. And that is it. So it,
Oh,
it it is those moments of totally being focused on what you're doing where everything else just melts away. And typically it feels amazing. So when we are so immersed in what we're doing, then it's not only boosting your performance, but often there are boosts on your satisfaction levels. And this is what the research shows us as well. The thing that I most often hear, though, when I ask this question to people is that they will commonly say that it is creative tasks, like you say, or sports. So a lot of people will say when they're running, when they're cycling, at a gym class, boxing, those kind of things, or creative outlets when you're drawing, dancing, any of those kind of things. Less common, people will say to me, it's something to do with work.
no one says Excel, right?
Wow, you say that. I have had Excel, and I've heard someone say it to me, invoices before gets them in the zone. So
Okay.
yeah, each of us are different, but it's more commonly that I hear that it's not work related tasks. And why is that? One, we don't know how to get ourselves into that state because the research and the science is relatively new, that it's been in the last 50 or so years and more recent developments in that time. And it hasn't necessarily been translated into how people can digest it. So people don't know how. So it's something we often experience sporadically, and we don't really know why. We don't really know how we could access it more consistently. And also, the modern office is set up often in a way that's highly unconducive to flow,
Mm.
where there are constant distractions, there are back-to-back meetings, you're checking your emails, this person is direct messaging you as well. You have a million and one things that you're ping-ponging between, which is very unconducive to getting you into that deep focus state. But really, why we want to be learning about how we can get into it is because, yes, it elevates your performance, but at a very substantial level. And so when we think around what are some of the key benefits that people can get from learning how to do this, just to give it some context, some of the studies. So, for example, there was a 10-year study done by McKinsey, and they did research into their executives over this 10-year period. And they found that when their executives were in flow state, they were up to 5 times more productive. So, if you put that into perspective, that if you work on something for 1 hour, your output is the same as 5 hours worth of a steady state human, which is wild. That is a huge uplift. And so, even if you take out in the research studies as well, that it is consistent that we see this boost in productivity, and we can come to why that is, what is happening in our brains to help us get that. So, one, productivity. Another one that we see is around creativity and creative problem solving. So, like what you mentioned around creative tasks, that we see that there can be a huge boost. So, Stephen Kotler, who I mentioned earlier, so the research that he has done, he has seen that the uplift could be as material as in between 400 to 700% increase in creativity,
Whoa.
which is staggering. But even if we take a more conservative studies and numbers, so there was a study done by the University of Sydney, and they had 33 participants, and they did the 9-dot problem, which people may have heard of it, that it's famously unsolvable. It's where you have 9 dots in a square and you have to connect them all, but you can only do it using straight lines and only a certain number of straight lines. It is famously really difficult. And when they first did this study and they had these 33 participants, no one could solve it. But then they dropped people into flow state. So they created the stimulation, and after 10 minutes, over 40% of those participants were then able to solve it. So it's really showing how when we can get into flow state and learn how to, then it can allow us to really access this greater level of creative problem solving and creativity, which for most people isn't going to be solving the 9-dot problem, but it will be things like, it might be in Excel, like you mentioned, it might be a piece of analysis, it might be a challenge that you're finding with a particular client or a prospect or a team member. It could be so many different things. So really having this significant boost to your creativity and creative problem solving can be huge. And then finally, one of the other key points of performance is that it boosts your speed of learning. And I mean, who doesn't want to be learning faster?
Yes.
So there was a study done by the Advanced Brain Monitoring and DARPA. So they are the research and development agency of the United States Department for Defense. And so they were working with their shooters. So they were training their novice beginners how to shoot better for their defense. And they found that with these, they had 51 of them. And they used a device that tracked their brain waves and also their heart rate. And they were given real-time feedback so that they can try and get them into this flow state using these biomarkers. And they found that those who did get this feedback to try and get them into flow state versus those that they didn't, those who did had an uplift of 2.3 times faster that they learned the skill.
It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is.
Yeah, if you could learn something twice as fast.
Yes, please.
And it's irrespective of what level we're at, whether you're the most junior in your team or you're the most senior, we're all learning. The skills that you're learning might be slightly different, but that is beneficial at all levels. So those are some of the key studies that I like to mention, but there are also benefits to your motivation levels, your decision making. Again, all really beneficial for performance. But I think then where it gets really interesting is that it's also shown to have benefits on your well-being. So not only can you perform at this higher level, but it also is shown to reduce your stress levels. And also it's shown that those who have these higher flow lifestyles are those with the highest life satisfaction. So day to day, you can feel less stress. And at the moment, sadly, we do have a state where people are highly stressed, where there is a huge amount of people that are burnt out or burning out, overwhelmed, and having these tools in their toolbox to be able to reduce your stress, but also boost your satisfaction. Because like you said, we're not just robots, that we want to enjoy our days, our weeks, whether that's at work and outside of work. So those are to set the scenes of flow state is. And then, yeah, if you like, we can go into how do people start accessing this?
Yes, please. Even asking for a friend. I'm joking. No, I want to know as well. I feel like we all want to know. Just a question beforehand. Do other factors come into play? Because, for example, my mom would say, oh, I'm too old, I can't learn new things. And, oh, for example, she's a child. She can pick this up. She can pick anything up really quickly. So does age come into factor, or neurodiversity, for example, ADHD? I'm super forgetful sometimes, and my brain decides when to hyperfocus sometimes. Like I'll even do a task I enjoy and I can't focus. So do these not external, but do these other factors come into play with flow?
Yeah, so it's a great point. And for ADHD, I think it's really interesting to note that there was a study done last year in 2024, and they found that actually the natural wiring for an ADHD brain has unique advantages for flow. So
please tell us more.
in flow, we can go into the mechanics of what's happening in your brain, but one of them is that there are two main networks that are also being at play here. So we have the default mode network, which is where we have mind wandering. And we also have the task positive network. So this drives focus to goal directed tasks. And then for ADHD, you may see that the default mode network tends to be overactive. So the mind will wander a bit more. But they found in the study that actually the ADHD brain is uniquely equipped for letting go of rigid control so that it can start to think more spontaneously, more creatively. So they found that actually hyperfocus, as you mentioned, that it can kick in, and that this can be driven by stimulating novel or personally meaningful tasks in particular. So a few suggestions and tips that we can draw from the research for those that do have ADHD. One, of course, and it's saying that it isn't just, it's universal. So far, the findings are that we can all access it, irrespective of whether you have ADHD, whether you are young, whether you are old. So if we think around 3 things that practically people could do. So if you do have ADHD, to help you, one, breaking things into smaller steps. So this is helpful for everyone, to be honest. And when we come to the flow triggers, this is something that it is a flow trigger, breaking things into smaller steps. But number 2, rotating things into having that diversity of tasks. So you can keep it fresh, where you have the ADHD brain's craving for novelty and variety, that you can satisfy that by doing that a bit more. And finally, leveraging tools to reduce the distractions as well. So things like noise cancelling headphones, things like the distraction apps, some of the things that could be maybe particularly helpful for someone if they have ADHD.
Wow. And it's so simple.
Mm.
Just to implement those 3 things. You don't need to buy something. You don't need extra brain space, right? You can do this now.
But I would say that getting into flow state and into this peak performance state, it is a muscle. So it's not as easy as just follow these steps and you will absolutely get there. One, it's a spectrum. So you can get a very macro, we would call like a macro flow state, where you have all of the hallmarkers of flow state are present. And this is where you're really lost in what you're doing. And you have that real big uplift because you feel amazing for doing it. You feel in control of what you're doing. But then equally, you may have other times where there are only a few of the hallmarks of flow that are present, where that you will still get some of the benefits, but to a lesser extent. And it's a muscle. It's the same with anything, whether you're learning how to meditate, whether you're learning how to run. The more that you do it, you really need to start building up. So with the same in this case is that whoever it is that's starting to want to start accessing flow more, you need to start doing it consistently and learning what works for you. Because today we can discuss, we obviously have limited time and there are so many different ways that people can approach it, and different things will work for different people. There are some that will be more general, but then there are going to be some nuance to it as to how your brain will be different to someone else's and mine. So really understanding that what we talk about today are some of the fundamentals, but then people should start experimenting with it and really starting to see what works best for them.
Yeah, and I can imagine like it can apply for work and for life because, for example, I hate laundry. I'm sure if I could outsource anything, it would be laundry and folding and putting it away because it just seems so, it's not even overwhelming. It's just like a nuisance in my life. Like I could go without. So I know I need to do it and it piles up and I'm like looking at the basket and I'm like, like, I don't want to do this. So breaking it up into smaller things, like, okay, separate the colors. Do just the underwear, the socks. Do just the shirts, the important things, and just bite-sizing it instead of looking at it as like a huge burden in your life. That's already like a really nice way of framing it.
Yeah. And I think maybe to take it to the next level, to put it into context, one, what's happening in your brain, and then the cycle of how you get into this. Because I think this is often the part where when we talk about the cycle, the bit where people have that light bulb moment where they start to recognize it in themselves where they're getting stuck. But first, if we explain briefly what is actually happening in your brain when you're in flow state, why do you get this uplift in the first place? Because it almost can sound too good to be true. And it can seem like this silver bullet. If I do this, it's going to cure all of my problems, which isn't the case. But it's more that it can be a really powerful tool. But what it is doing, at least what we know of from the research so far, of course, the science is always evolving, but three main things. So one, we have a cocktail of neurochemicals, neurotransmitters that are being released in our brain. These are feel good, these are performance enhancing. And some of them you probably would recognize the name of them. Things like dopamine, things like endorphins, things like serotonin. And so some of these combined, they're elevated things like your alertness, your motivation. Some of them are actually painkillers as well. And so combined, they're giving you the right neurochemicals to set you up to be able to feel and perform at this better level. Next is also the brain waves that we have. And so here we have, at least we think we know, that we have alpha theta brain waves. So these are really what allowing us to, it's like a relaxed creativity. It's like you're alert, but you're also creative. So this is a part of it. And then finally, what is happening from a neuroanatomical perspective, so the different parts of your brain. And I think what was really interesting is that we've seen that the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit just behind your forehead, that's responsible for executive function. So things like your planning, your logical reasoning, those kind of things, it seems to temporarily deactivate when we go into flow state. And why that's interesting is because it then allows us to access this deeper intuition. And we're really going from this conscious problem solving, going more into the subconscious. So it's a bit like if you think it like a car and you are on the highway, you're on the motorway, and you're speeding down in sixth gear. That's what it can be a bit likened to as an analogy, because it's where you're going faster, everything seems a bit more easier and seamless, and you're not having to think about it so much, that these ideas just come to you, these ideas just connect. And this is because of these three things that are mainly happening, that are allowing you collectively to do that. But also the part of your brain that's temporarily deactivating is also responsible for partially timekeeping. So which is why we maybe don't know how long we've been doing something for, but also our inner critic. So which is why it can be interesting that then we can start to think a bit more expansively, rather than thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't, no, that would be a bad idea, oh, I shouldn't say that. That temporarily quietening is powerful, because then we can start to think without that voice inside. So those three things collectively happening are really what are allowing us to have this heightened level of performance. So how people can then start accessing it when we look at the cycle. So it's important to say up front that it's not like an on and off switch. It's not like a light switch where it's on or it's off. Like I mentioned to you earlier, that it is a bit of a spectrum. Equally, there's a cycle. So there are 4 stages. So number 1. And the sad thing about number 1 is that when I speak to most people, that people vastly are not making it out of the first stage. So they are in the most painful stage without breaking through to get the benefits of actually being in this deep focus state. So number 1, it's called the struggle phase. And so if I set this up to think around what a typical day might look like to bring it to life. So perhaps it's a Tuesday morning, you've got your favorite coffee or matcha tea, and you've got a to-do list as long as your arm, and you need to start diving in. You've worked out what your top priorities are, and you go. You're on number 1, and you're starting to blast through it. But after about 10 to 15 minutes, you start to feel this urge to do something else. And you might not even realize that you're doing it, but before you know it, you have picked up your phone, you've checked your email, you have walked to go and do something else. And so here it's because it's not a particularly comfortable feeling, but it's natural. So when we're starting to concentrate, there are stress hormones, chemicals that are being pumped into our brain. So to help us to focus, but it can give us that like agitated feeling to want to do something else. And often people will be pinging in and out of this stage all day long because they're not persisting with the focus for long enough to break through into the next phase. So if you can do that and you can sustain your attention without ping-ponging between the different tasks and being distracted, then we come to the second phase. So number 2 is called release. And here it is thinking around how to temporarily step away from what you're doing. So when you're in it and these stress chemicals are happening, then now we need to think about temporarily taking your mind to do something else. And why that is because we're taking it from going into our subconscious. And so you may recognize this. When I definitely had this too. If I was really trying to solve a problem or trying to do a piece of analysis and I would be staring at it for so long, I would go for a quick cycle home or I'd go for a quick walk, and then the answer just comes to me like, oh, so obvious. It's that kind of thinking. Or sometimes in the shower is another thing that often people will have their great ideas in the shower. And so it's temporarily coming away. So what might that look like realistically in the office? You might do this without thinking, going to get a glass of water, going to get a cup of tea. Or you really ideally want to be thinking simple and soothing. So what are some simple and soothing things that you can do in that moment to switch gears? So here it could be something like taking a few deep breaths at your desk. I'm a huge advocate for breath work. A lot of the finance professionals that I work with are often very skeptical at the start. But when you can explain why it's so beneficial, and it's because it's one of the quickest ways for you to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So your rest and digest. And it's easy. You can do it anywhere. You can do it on the move. But as we're trying to get into flow state is unique in the sense that our two systems are in balance. So our fight or flight and our rest and digest. So we really want to start getting ourselves into that calmer state. So in fact, when we are too stressed, it can be a real inhibitor of being able to get there. So breath work or a walk, just brief, 1 minute, something like that can be really helpful. So now as we've gone through that, music can also be really beneficial here. Or another one, actually, there are push-ups. So if you push-ups can be another one.
Jamie, if you see me doing push-ups at home, you know what's going on.
I won't question it.
So now if you start seeing people doing some stretching or some push-ups in the office, you might know why. But maybe more for one when you're at home or on the weekends. So and now we're going into, eventually once we've gone through that, we'll get the boost of dopamine. Our stress chemicals will have gone down. We'll get the boost of dopamine, and then we've got that boost of motivation and focus again. So now we can go into flow state. And in flow state, this is where we have this deep focus. It feels amazing. We're getting all the benefits of doing so. But the important part here is not to overextend yourself. Because it is expensive neurochemically, that there is a lot happening, that if you stay there for too long, you will often feel frazzled. And I think many of us have had that, where you have focused for too long and then you've got a headache, you need to go and lay down, you reach the end day and you don't want to see or talk to anyone because you feel dreadful. And this could be where you are not taking enough recovery time or overexerting yourself in this deep focus state. So here we want to ideally be staying there for this cycle in between 90 to 120 minutes. So not wanting to do it for too much longer than that, and we can come to why. So we're there, we want to aim for this peak flow exit, ending on a high. Then the fourth stage is important here, it's the recovery. Because you have worked super hard and you've had a lot going on in your brain, it's really important to recover. And even going through the cycle, you might start to see where the common places where I see people get stuck. And this is definitely one of them. So where people don't take that time afterwards because they think they don't have time, they've got another meeting, they need to just jump onto the next thing. But if you think around some of the uplifts that I mentioned, so the productivity one, for example, if you have spent even 1 hour of your time in that flow state, you have done a multiple of the amount of work and to the quality that you would have done if you hadn't done it and you'd done it very distracted outside of trying to get into flow state. So thinking that recovery is part of the process, not a reward. You have to do it if you want to be performing at this high level consistently. It is a really important stage in this. And so what could that look like in the office? Realistically, it might be a walk. It might be going to get a coffee with your colleague. It might be going to do some mindfulness meditation if you're into that. It could be a whole host of different things. It might be going to the gym if you also can. It could be great. But really having this reset at the end so that you can do this cycle again. Because otherwise you
can do it more than once.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. I was going to ask you.
So it's something that you will naturally build up, but I will often get asked, okay, how often should I be doing this? And there's an idealistic answer and a more realistic answer. So in an ideal world, of course, if you could do this, if you could have one session in the morning and you could have one session in the afternoon, amazing, because you will be super productive. You will do not only a lot of work, but great quality work in an ideal world. The challenge is that for a lot of people, when they are super busy, they have lots of meetings, that's not always feasible. So always say about starting small. So can you try once a week to start with? Can you then build that up to twice a week? And if next week, likely your diary is already jam-packed, booking it in for 2 weeks' time, when your diary is already a bit more free, blocking that time out and making it a non-negotiable, so that you can really reap the benefits of doing so. But yes.
How long do you need? Because the flow state itself is 90 to 120 minutes. How much time in between do you need?
So I'd say that for the full cycle. So ideally 90 to 120 minutes for all of it.
Okay.
But realistically, and I hear this a lot, that people say, Emily, I don't have 90 to 120 minutes in my day, in my week. Okay, first of all, I would challenge you to find that time. What needs to happen? Is it that there are some unimportant meetings that need to be turned into an email? Is it actually that...
I'm looking at employers, leaders, self-employed people.
Is it that you need to move around your work schedule a little bit so that you can carve out this time, and actually viewing it that if you do carve out this time, likely a lot of the tasks that you want to do, you will do much faster and to a better level. So really challenging yourself to that. But if you tell me I absolutely can't, and maybe that's true for some, start with an hour. Trying to find an hour in your week somewhere and starting with that. And then likely as you start to experiment and you start to see some of the benefits, then maybe that can nudge you to try and build into this more. But if you are someone who isn't in control of your diary, that can be challenging. So really trying to mark it out and making people around you aware of the importance of it. If you're a team leader, thinking, maybe I could try this with the team. And this can work really well, because then often one of the biggest challenges and the biggest blockers are the distractions. So most commonly I will see that it's at the struggle phase that people are so distracted that they don't persist with their concentration long enough, or that they don't recover. And in a lot of cases, it's both of those that I will hear people take. When I ask people how often are they taking breaks, whether it's always, sometimes, very often, it's very little time that they will say always, that they're always prioritizing their breaks. And same with the distractions, that very often working with teams, that I will hear that it's either very often or always being distracted. So it's thinking about how can you individually work to reduce some of these blockers, and we can come to some strategies for how to do that. But thinking for yourself, and if you are someone who manages a team or managing others, is this something that you could trial? Is it something that you could make it team-wide for a month? And ideally tracking it. So thinking at the start, how much control do your team feel like they have over their calendar? How productive do they feel like they are? How much do they feel like they have the ability to drive new projects forward? And seeing that if you implement this, starting with once or twice a week, and here thinking around, we can come to peak brain hours. So there are typical times of day that for most people are when our brains are firing best. And most commonly it's in the morning. So if you did want to roll this out to your teams, thinking, okay, you can either ask them individually when they work best, but if you want to find a consensus, blocking out, say, a Wednesday and a Friday morning, 9 to 11, and seeing what happens, can really try to help to remove the challenges around at least the struggle piece, where people have that moment of calm where they know that their team and perhaps other people are aware that they won't be contactable for a little while.
It sounds amazing. So it's essentially like boundary setting and
Mm.
blocking out your calendar. I was just thinking about parents.
Mm.
Oh, can you imagine like juggling not just one kid, but 2, 3 kids, taking them to school, constant distractions?
Mm-hmm.
Kids are great, but they're also human beings and they need stuff. But and then work as well,
Mm.
balancing all of that. Your brain must just be
Mm-hmm.
like, this sounds impossible, right? To get
Mm.
into flow state, actually get shit done.
Yeah. No, often parents are, I think, superhumans because it's hard enough to when you don't have children to manage your time like this, let alone when you have one or multiple, how you fit this in. And I often used to see that some of the people that had children were some of the most productive because
Oh,
they had to be, where they knew that they had to go and do the school run or something. They had to leave at a certain time. And it means that you only have a certain window that you can do your work, which can be helpful, actually, when we're thinking around flow triggers. One of them is the challenge skills balance. And what I mean by that is thinking around how the task that you're doing, how you make sure that the challenge level is suitable for your skills, because there is what we would call the flow channel. So if the challenge is too high, this is often when we're overwhelmed, too stressed, really hard to string our thoughts together. On the flip side, if we're not being challenged enough, we get bored.
Mm.
And then we procrastinate, we do all these bunch of other things. So thinking around how can you make the task for yourself that you have, but if you're someone who delegates to others as well, thinking how can you make sure that the task you're giving them matches the right challenge level. And a great way to do that is flexing the amount of time that you have to do something. Because for me, something that I really always put off doing is in my tax returns, doing all of my invoices and those kind of things. So now, rather than having it as an open-ended thing, it's, okay, I need to get this done in 40 minutes. Suddenly, your brain dials in because you only have this period to do it, which is why some of the superhumans that I've seen, that then they can be super efficient because they only have a certain window.
Like that urgency, like I remember an exam week and stuff like that, like studying and like shit an hour before the exam,
Yeah.
or like a deadline, like I need to get these PowerPoint slides done an hour before the meeting and stuff like that. Yeah. Wow.
There's no alternative. So
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I was also thinking as well while you were speaking, because you mentioned the front. What is it called?
The prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, so this is like the more logical. Is that where stress kind of lives? Because it feels like it.
Well, you have an emotional center called the amygdala, which is when we see people who are very stressed, this will often be quite active. And this can be then when that part is really stimulated, is the reason why when you are highly stressed, then maybe you don't make the best, that it impacts how you show up. Because it is an emotional center, it can be when you catch your t-shirt on the door handle and it sends you into a spin for no reason. Those kind of things, because we're in that heightened level of stress, our brain is really in this fight or flight mode and almost looking to survive. So because it doesn't know the difference between whether you're stressed about your deadline or whether you're being chased by a really dangerous animal, it's really having to put you into that heightened state of fight or flight. And that can come with impacting your decision making, how you show up in terms of your emotional regulation, where you might be more tearful or you might be more angry, those kind of things. So yeah, our stress can be impacting different parts, but one part in particular is our emotional center that can be really impacted. And when we think around how that impacts our behaviors, is that when we are in our fight or flight state, it can be really, really hard to change behaviors. So if people want to be less stressed, they want to sleep better, they want to introduce new habits, when you're in that really high state of stress, it can be really difficult because your brain is really defaulting to the path most traveled, thinking rather than adding more. It's thinking, okay, what do I know? So that's when, and same in my story back when I used to then eat rubbish and that I would not prioritize my sleep, even though that I knew that I should. But when you are in that really heightened state, chronically stressed, that, yeah, this part of your brain can make it really difficult to introduce new behaviors as well.
Yeah, it feels like you're just, like you said, adding extra things to your routine, and your brain is quite lazy. It's like, let's do what we know and get back to that, like put it in a box, like we'll figure that out later. But actually I'm just thinking about it, like if you did implement these things, like like pushing through in the morning and then doing something different, like going for a walk or something, or getting a glass of water, and then the flow state, like the actual focus 90 minutes and then rest. But like you're gonna go to bed rested, you're gonna sleep well, you're not gonna eat junk, because you're being, you're doing the work, and you're gonna go home and feel satisfied, like I did 5 times, you said, the amount of work and quality, and I showed up for those 90, 120 minutes than I would have if I was stressed and I caught my t-shirt in the door handle, or I tripped and spilt my coffee on my laptop, or like I totally relate. And I've even done it when I've like been so stressed, like sending an email, I'm literally like I'm not being chased by wolves, I'm just sending an email, and you're just in this horrible state where it's just like you're not present, you're not living, you're not being your highest performing self, you're just getting by. And that's the reality for most people.
Yeah, no, and it is. And when we think around what are some of the most common blockers for getting into this flow state, yes, distractions, like I was mentioning, but another big one is this high stress. Also things like a lack of recovery, also a lack of clarity on what you're doing. So you're not really thinking about what you're doing, the big picture. Then you can get in this procrastination because then you get stuck and then it feels too hard. So you go and distract yourself doing something else. But to tie on the stress point as well, to bring it to life, how it impacts you by it being highly stressed, there was a study that I thought was really interesting from 64 healthy adults. And it was evenly split between men and women. And so it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. And they took 20 milligrams of cortisol, so stress, to mimic the state of severe stress. And they gave them to some group, but it was a placebo, so people didn't know which one they had. And then after an hour, they played Pac-Man, if you remember Pac-Man, for 5 rounds. And they rated their flow experience after each one. And they found that the high cortisol levels significantly reduced their ability to enter flow state, those who were given the cortisol, which shows that those who are really highly stressed, they will find it difficult to get into this state, which is why flow is often something that I do as a later stage when working with people, because there are some foundations that you need in first. You really need to know the vision that you have for yourself. You really need to have some positive habits in there around eating well, sleeping well, and managing your stress, so that when it does come to entering this state, because as I mentioned, your 2 systems are in balance, your fight and flight and your rest and digest, that if you are too heightened, it's going to be really difficult to get in there.
And you also mentioned motivation, like the purpose of what you're doing, right?
Yeah. So sometimes we know what we should be doing, but we just don't feel like it. And the part of getting into flow state is that often the things that get us there are because they are intrinsically motivating. We enjoy them. So when I think around what people can do to try and make this work to their advantage, thinking there are 3 kind of basics that recommending for people to do at a fundamental level so that they can start accessing this more. So if we think about number 1, that you really need to be blocking out the time. As we mentioned, a lot of us don't do this, but really having these 90-minute blocks. And talk to the reason why is that people are maybe more familiar with that we have sleep cycles, that we have at nighttime, you go through different phases, but you also have that in the daytime. So we have ultradian rhythms, which are effectively different things that are going in our body throughout the day, but we have a natural rhythm for our alertness and productivity. And so trying to work with those can make a huge difference, which is why we're aiming for these 90 to 120 minutes. And ideally doing it in your peak brain hours, as I mentioned, that we all typically, intuitively, you all know if you're a morning person, if you're a night owl, and really trying to use that to your advantage. So that's number one. Number two is really creating this distraction-free zone. So when you have blocked out this time, it's go time now, really closing your emails, closing your messenger.
DND.
Phone is in another room, out of sight, and really trying to remove all the distractions. When I work with some teams, some of them say actually some of the biggest distractions can come from others. So here you can maybe also think around the cues that you're giving to other people that you are in your deep focus state now, and not to come to you unless it's something urgent, if it's just something menial that they're coming with. So for some people, they like physical signs.
Yes, it's becoming popular having the back of your chair, like, do not bother me unless it's a puppy in the office, chocolate.
So a physical sign. Or if you're working more remote, then changing your status on Slack or whatever channel you use to have it in there and making the people around you aware so that they're not interrupting you. And finally, really thinking about a ritual. So rituals can be really powerful. And what do I mean by that is if we think about pre-game rituals, we see them in sports. So LeBron James is famously known for throwing the chalk in the air before his games, or Nadal, tennis, that he has a very meticulous routine that he tends to have with how he places his water bottles. They need to be facing the court in a certain way. And really, this can be translated, looking at the research, into the working setting. So having a ritual, so specific repeated actions that you do at the start of your deep focus session. So it could be things that are ideally bringing down your stress levels. So it might be taking a few deep breaths. It might be going to get your glass of water, your coffee, matcha, whatever you're drinking, so that you don't have to go and do that during. It might be that you put your earphones in, but also thinking around to the point of motivation and breaking chunks down. It could be that it becomes a ritual that before you start this session, you spend the first 5 minutes planning, because it is a flow trigger that's really helping you, because then it becomes more seamless. You know, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're in. But at the same time, for a motivational level, asking yourself, what do I need to do? Why do I need to do this? And how can I make sure that the challenge level is right for me in this? So what we're tapping into there is, what do I need to do? So thinking around, what is the task? How do I break it down? Why do I need to do this? This is trying to get more of this motivation. So, and this can be difficult if it's a boring task. Some of them,
or if it's a boring task, if your company's going through some stuff, right? And you're like, what's the point?
Exactly. But it's trying to connect it to your personal development or the business goals as to why is this important. And it might be that it's helping you to train up in this certain skill. It might be that it's going to get you exposure to this certain person. It might be that it's helping your business towards its mission of doing this thing. So really trying to connect with that to help you be more motivated, even when it's something that you maybe don't immediately get excited about. And then the final point, how can I change the challenge level, like we were saying earlier, to suit my skills, so that you can really nail this challenge skills ratio, so that you don't get bored, you don't get overwhelmed, but you get in there. But these rituals can be really powerful, and they should only take a couple of minutes. They should be something that's specific, they're repeated. But why they're working is because they can elevate your performance as you have this sense of control. You have this moment of control, and it's also signaling. You start to have this association that, okay, well, when I do this, that means that it's a flow session. This means that it's a deep focus session. This means that I don't do anything else and I just really focus, so that you have this less mental fatigue and more sense of control. So those three things are some basics to cover off some of the key blockers and some of the challenges that people face, in addition to taking breaks as well for recovery, which needs to be something that people prioritize rather than seeing it as a reward.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, is this part of the 3-step framework that you have, or is this different?
It's actually different. More to come.
Yay.
So the 3-step framework that I work with people on is similar to what I was mentioning earlier. So it's the 3 stages. Number 1 is visualize. Number 2 is energize. And number 3 is optimize. And flow really tends to fit in this optimize category. So number 1, and the reason why I do it like this is because that you need to know getting into flow state is difficult. It's something you need to practice. It's a muscle. You need to be carving out the time. You need to know, even if that's not what you want to optimize, why are you doing what you're doing? What do you want to achieve? And this doesn't need to be really meticulously planned goals, but an overall direction. Who is it that you want to be? How do you want to show up to the world? And what is the overarching direction that you want to go in? So being really clear on that and tying it to your identity, the person that you want to be, because that can really help us stick to it at a deeper level. And we see that whether that's relating them to your goals or whether to your habits, that really tying them to your identity is really powerful. So you need to know where you're going and why. Next is this energized piece that, as we were talking around, if you are exhausted, if you are drowning in stress, it is going to be really hard for you to bring in new habits and to optimize your life even further until you have these basics mastered. So thinking around whether it is breath work, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's journaling, whether it's sleeping, how you can optimize your sleep, the different pillars within energy so that you can manage your stress, but also you can manage your energy, because we often think that we want more time, but often if we have more energy and more focus, that will give us more time. And then finally, on the optimize, it's now thinking, okay, I know where I'm going. I've built some foundational habits that are really supporting me to feel great. Now I'm thinking, how can I be even better? So this is where flow can come in as a performance enhancer. But for other people, that might not be it. It might be that they need to work on their leadership. It might be that they need to work on their emotional intelligence, a variety of different things. And in some cases, it doesn't necessarily always have to happen in this order. For some people, they've got the foundations nailed. They know where they're going. They've got great habits and they want to just know how they go to the moon. Whereas other people actually can't even think about their vision until they reduce their stress levels because they're just in survival mode every day. So those are the 3 stages that I tend to work on with people, but then flexing it depending on where people are at.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense. I have a friend as well at the moment who's kind of dealing with this situation as well. And she mentioned to me, I'll send this to her, she'll probably listen to this, that she is struggling with because she's so stressed, she's in the survival mode, that she's going to stop with like therapy and stuff like that and just focus on just what's around her, right? Like getting a job, etc., learning a new language and stuff in the new country, because getting into the foundation is really emotionally taxing and it's just too much to deal with at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So actually just, focusing on the vision and then leaving kind of the optimization to later, because otherwise it's just all at the same time, isn't it? It's overwhelming, it's too much, makes you even more stressed, and then you just get burnt out and you stay in bed and you're just like, I don't want to do anything.
Yeah. Like with the new year, it's a great time to talk about it, really. We're now at the start of the year.
Yeah.
A lot of people come in and they will say, Emily, I want to change these 10 things. And they want to reshape their life. And that's amazing that you want to make so many positive changes. But it's really difficult to do more than 1 or 2 at a time. So it's thinking, okay, what is the number 1 priority for me right now? And that might be just to have some stress management techniques in place first before you can even think about some of the others. So yeah, I think it is thinking around what are the 1 or 2 things that are the key priorities for you, rather than giving yourself a whole washing list of things that you're trying to change at once.
Yeah, and once you actually, I don't know about anyone else, but I find when I achieve one, when I'm like, okay, I'm less stressed, great, I have more energy. What's next? And you're in this kind of like roll, you're like, bam, bam, bam. What's the next level? What can I do now? And then your life kind of changes in a flow, in a structure, as you do one thing and you complete it and then get better.
Yeah, and you get the momentum, and it can really then feed into other parts of your life. And the same with in the case of when we are talking about habits related to focus and flow, that so far we've spoken a lot around in the context of individual work, where it's how people can progress when they're working on their own. And maybe that is the starting place for some people whilst they work out, okay, how do I get into this state more consistently? But there is also group flow that you can have it in with other people.
Oh.
So in conversations, I imagine in a lot of your podcast episodes, you get into a flow state.
Yeah. Now?
Hopefully, if I'm doing a good enough job. But for other people that when you get more senior, maybe you do less of the doing. And for most of us, it's somewhat of a blend that you have individual things, whether that's analysis, whether it's strategy, planning, vision that you need to do. But then there's likely a people element that's a big part of it as well, whether that's your team, internal meetings, clients, pitching. So also thinking as we speak about momentum, that really understanding it's important to say that it's also something you can do in a group setting. And in fact, that can be so powerful because when you can both be in a flow state, one, it feels amazing that you've both been in this flow state, but it can get you to really great outcomes. And so some of the triggers that get you into an individual flow state are very similar, but maybe it's interesting to mention a couple of them. Is that so some of the triggers that we have for individual work, so like the clear goals, like I mentioned, but there are also a variety of others. It can be things like novelty, which we also touched upon, things like the challenge skills balance, which we spoke about. There are also, for me, boxing is a really high flow activity. I go boxing, so I think it can bring it to life a little bit that when I go boxing, there are so many flow triggers there for me because it's novel. The challenge level is right because I am learning. Pattern recognition is another one that in the class I go to, there are sequences that you have to follow.
Yeah.
So as I go back and I start to recognize patterns or how I hit the bag in a certain way, my brain likes that. There's also music. There's also less so in my class, but if you were boxing one-on-one, risk is another one, for example. So when we think around how that translates into group flow and what that might look like, things like shared goals. So rather than just clear goals, now, so at the start of meetings, it's okay, we are doing this collectively, you're setting this vision together. Other ones can be things like shared risk and familiarity. So here I actually got into flow state chatting with someone on the plane when I was recently doing a long haul flight on Boxing Day. There was a very unique type of profile of person that I was looking to connect with. And just by chance, I ended up being sat next to the person who did that exact type of work, even though that someone had told me they're going to be really difficult to find someone who you're looking for. They sat next to me on the plane. So we were on a 12-hour flight and I completely lost track of time. But when I looked at how long we had left of the flight, we must have been speaking for maybe 3 hours.
Wow.
People around us are looking like, do these two know each other? But because it had a lot of the other group flow triggers in there, so things like deep listening, this guy, after I'd spoken up conversation, he didn't have any distractions. There's nowhere he can go to jump off the plane.
Yeah.
So,
can't use your phone really.
No, there's no phone. So it was complete concentration. There was deep listening. We had a shared goal that we were speaking about a project that I'm working on and I was getting his opinion. So we were working together that. Familiarity, because we'd shared a little bit about our story, where we were going on holiday, who we were going to meet there. A bit of shared risk because I was sharing my ideas and my thoughts, opening up to a stranger who may have said, actually, that's a terrible idea, Emily, I disagree because of X, Y, and Z. But thinking how you can create these in team settings. So I'm working with a head of sales at the moment for a tech startup, and we're thinking around how can you build some of these into your pitches? How can you get that sense of familiarity? How can you have that shared goal at the start of the call? Like, this is the purpose of today's call. Maybe an element of shared risk being, this might not be for you, but you can feel free to veto this and we leave the call as friends. Those kind of things, weaving them into the conversation can be super powerful because recognizing that for a lot of people that are listening to this, they won't only be doing individual work. So it's important to understand that you can absolutely do this in a group setting And in fact, there's incredible work by Keith Sawyer done on this, that really understanding how people can do that, how teams can do that. And it can be really, really powerful.
Yeah. I was just kind of visualizing back to like brainstorming sessions I had with my team, projects with deadlines, like physical ones where we're literally in a room and we had this. It felt like school. I don't know why we did this, but it was really productive. And there was like all these HR directors from all these different countries. It was so cool. It was like a summit. And we all just kind of were together with this blank piece of paper. And we're like, okay, we have to come up with something like a project, right, for the new year. And it was crazy. And just brainstorming, like even the actual spider diagram itself and people taking responsibility for each topic and explaining it and everyone having a role, and like so cool. It makes me excited talking about it. I feel like it's so interesting, like bringing different people together and then having that common goal aligns you, brings you together.
And equal participation is another one of the glute flow triggers. So like you say, so when you're in a meeting, making sure that everyone does feel like they can contribute and you encourage them to contribute, and because then people feel like they're part of it and feeling in control in that as well. So feeling like that you can contribute, that you can speak up, and that it is a safe space with your brainstorming idea. So if you have an idea that you maybe think is crazy, but being able to share it can also be creating the environments for that, where people can get creative. Because if you are getting into flow state, people are going to be a lot more creative anyway. So there might be some ideas that feel much more visionary.
Yeah. And I think, just as an ending note, a really important topic, I need to learn this from you, the recovery, the rest. Please tell us, how do we switch off?
Yes. This is so important, because I guess it's important today, we're thinking around how we help people to switch on when they need to, but also to switch off when you want to. And it's hard.
Yes.
It's really hard, because being able to switch off, especially when you're in really competitive, high performing roles, there is always more to be done, and it can feel endless. So in terms of breaks, things that can work well with some people that I've worked with is that for breaks in your daytime is marking them in your calendar. So maybe you set yourself a break one morning, one afternoon.
Okay.
You block it on your calendar. So you're going to get the reminder. You might not always take it because you might not be able to, but you're getting those reminders throughout your day that you should be stepping away. So that's something that you can do throughout your daytime. I also have people who then tell their colleagues that this is something they're actively trying to work on, so that then they suggest, oh, you've been working really hard, maybe we should go and grab a coffee, or maybe we should go for a walk, and having that shared accountability. But also, there was the organizational scholar Cal Newport. He speaks around having a shutdown routine. And this can be powerful. And before hearing it from him, it's something that I hadn't considered, but it's really having a defining moment in your day that signifies the end of work and the start of your leisure time. So what can realistically that look like? So it might be, and this can be shown to be really valuable, is that you look at what you've achieved in your day. You've looked at your to-do list. You've marked off, okay, I've done this thing, this thing, this thing. I didn't get to this. So I know that I need to do that tomorrow, so that you know that you have captured all of your thoughts from the day and what needs to happen tomorrow as a priority. You have captured it somewhere, whether that's written, whether that's virtual, and you've blocked it out in your diary, even better. But you have then taken the time to consolidate all of your thoughts. And then he talks about having a phrase that you almost say out loud. So like, shutdown complete.
Like we're PCs. Shut down complete. Okay.
Like we're a computer and you're switching off, because then it stops you having this, oh, did I do that thing? Oh, I don't know if I captured my thought on that. Or the worst, when you get into bed and your head hits the pillow and you remember that thing that you didn't do.
Oh, every night. Oh my God.
And it's nagging you that you need to do it tomorrow. Whereas taking in this intentional time for 2 minutes to really reflect on that, and signaling the transition time that, okay, work is now over, then that can be helpful, and that can look different for different people. If you can switch off your work phone and close your laptop at that time, great, to really add some friction.
Is it good to like leave that space, get out of the building? Or like, how does it work if you work from home?
Yeah, so from home, that's why it's so difficult. But having this shutdown routine is something that's symbolic that you do every day and that you place importance on it, and you know that you've captured all of your thoughts, and then there's now no more that you can do. So
Okay.
ideally in the morning, you've set out your 3 non-negotiables for the day. And so like, I know if I've done these 3 things, I've had a great day. These were my main priorities. If you then in the afternoon, you review that, add new things to your list, and then that's your sign that you can switch off. But yes, if you're at home, ideally then closing your laptop, and if you can, switch off your work phone from a certain point in the evening until a certain point in the morning, because then you're really getting this time to switch off. And there can be some resistance that comes with that, because they're like, oh, but what if something's urgent? I need to always be contactable.
Nothing is urgent. At work, nothing is urgent unless you're a doctor.
Yeah, but really trying to experiment with that, because recognizing that if you want to perform at the top of your game and you want to be that person that you really want to be, you want to be a top performer, but you also want to be a great friend, a great partner,
True.
all of these other things that are important to you outside of work, you need to be rested.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be present.
Mm.
You're so right. I'm gonna like honestly, I'm gonna listen to this episode again, probably multiple times, when it's aired, and I want to put this into practice. And when I like post, like when I talk about this episode, I want to share my experience
Yeah.
with the things that you've taught us today, because it's so simple. It's like things you would realize if you really thought hard about the topic or researched it yourself, but you know the stuff. So you've told us everything is like a guide, it's a manual. We need to like transcribe this, make it into a book, maybe an idea
Yeah.
for you.
There are a lot more complex and level up things that you can do, but today really thinking about the nailing the basics
Yeah.
is so important before you start thinking around how you can do more biohacking and those kind of things to
They
get
can reach
yourself
out to you directly and work with you.
Yeah, but focus on nailing the basics first, and I can't wait to see how you get on with it.
Oh my God, I'm so excited because it's new. Novelty. It's fresh.
Yeah.
It's new. You make me want to do boxing again. So a fun twist to the end of the podcast. You get to pick your last question. We're using the Spark Seek Discomfort cards. So different cards. Novelty again.
Okay.
So I haven't even shuffled these. I've done it terribly, but just feel free to pick one. There you
they're
go.
very
And you
pretty.
can read it yourself and answer it.
Oh, it's a good one as well. What does success look like to you in the next 5 years?
That's so relatable. That's wild.
Yeah. Another spooky thing happening. So what does it look like to me in the next 5 years? So I've spent a lot of time building out my vision for the year. It's January. I am looking forward to the next year, but also the next 5. And for me, it's really now about elevating. So last year was the first year of me being full-time at my business, and I learned so much. And now it's think around how you take it to that next level, so that I can help more people, that I can make an even bigger impact, that I can really help individuals and organizations to strike this balance better, so that they can gain their competitive edge and that they can be the best at what they do, not get left behind, but also taking care of their people, that their people don't have to be run into the ground in the process, and recognizing that actually there's benefits to nurturing them both as one. So for me, success in the next 5 years looks like scaling so that I can reach more and more people. And through things like doing the podcast, that I love my one-to-one work and the depth that you get to go into, but being able to share it on broader platforms so that people can listen from anywhere in the world. So really continuing on that journey. And a big part for me is also there are groups of people who I specifically want to help that I know maybe can't afford coaching. So the next 5 years for me, really taking what I'm doing to the moon, but then also people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who maybe grew up similar to me, that maybe they only had one parent and they grew up in a council house and they can't afford the luxury of coaching or some of these other opportunities, that I would love to be able to do that more, that I can help these, whether that's at the student level, early careers, professionals, so that they can level the playing field and gain the advantage they haven't always had.
Yeah, and I can recommend you to universities and stuff, because I'm quite connected with the university programs, and I feel like they will benefit. And it's a good way to like reach Also younger audience, right? Because they're just living on their phones and they are constantly comparing themselves and they can't afford these services as well. Or they prioritize different things like going on skiing holidays and drinking and, having like Michelin star dinners and stuff. But it's, equally important. And I'm happy to introduce you to unis and stuff. I feel like you're doing God's work. Everything you're doing, the one-on-ones, coming on podcasts as well, like sharing your knowledge for free on LinkedIn as well, on socials is just incredible. And I love that you've enhanced it by hiring a team as well, like just diving in deeper with that, like mind hacking, neuroscience. I'm obsessed with it too. I feel like, people have the power within themselves to change how they work and also the team dynamics as well and parenting as well. Like there's so many benefits to this. And I feel like it should be common knowledge, like you said, it should be available.
Yeah, and that's the plan. But success also looks like adventure and spending time with my loved ones so that it isn't just one-dimensional like it used to be, that I'm out there living life and full of joy and happiness, realistic happiness.
Yay!
Traveling and just having a great time, enjoying the small moments.
Yeah, so not only using it for your coaching to other people and benefiting them, but using the experience and expertise on yourself.
Romanticizing your life.
Amen.
It is amazing. Last year was the best year, I think, of my life so far. And just continuing to do that again and again in my work, but also outside of work.
Emily, you are proof that you've moved from a high pressure burnout kind of environment in finance, and now you are living your best life and you're teaching others to do the same. You are living proof. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's my favorite thing to do.
And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We could talk again. I think we need part 2 to dive into stress and all the other things that we didn't dive into, but we did scratch the surface and give people the important information to take action today.
Thank you so much. I've loved it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been amazing.